Thank you. Used to having them put on my lapel. Boy, you got a lot of questions here from the theater audience already, and we do welcome them. And welcome to this event. I'm glad to be working with Aaron. We had a session on my program Forum together, but it was then a theater production, and now it's a film. And I thought maybe we could begin by talking about how it evolved into a film and, well, what happened in terms of that trajectory. Maybe you can outline it for us.
Sure. Well,
Are you on?
am I on? I think now maybe I'm on. The film premiered the stage play premiered at Intersection for the Arts here in San Francisco in 2014, and an old colleague and friend of mine, Dylan Kussman, who's a filmmaker from Los Angeles, had the idea to make it into cinema. Not just film the stage production, but really make cinema. And that really intrigued me, particularly because we both felt the power, the message of the piece, wanted to get out to as wide an audience as possible. And while I've been since then touring the play all over North America, I can only be in one place at a time, apparently. And so it was exciting to think that we could maybe expand it and expand the reach. And in doing so, also dig into what cinema could provide that the stage play can't, specifically the kind of wide, expansive scope of the desert that could help carry some of the spiritual dimensions of the piece, and also the intimacy that we were able to shoot in the dressing room, kind of intimacy that film can, the close-up, basically, the wide shot and the close-up, which you can't really do in theater. And I think Dylan had this really interesting idea to frame the piece live on stage, so we capture the theatrical energy, but then also shoot it in these two other locations, the dressing room and the desert.
Makes it into a different product, though, doesn't it?
I think it does. I mean, I think it's a movie now.
And happy with the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled with what I'm very proud of what we came up with, and the whole team. I mean, we had an amazing cinematographer, incredible editor, amazing composer, and a whole team that worked on it.
When you talk about wanting the powerful message to spread, I mean, almost sounds like a kind of wish for proselytizing, or at least making people more enlightened and everything. That message, it seems, I mean, there's a lot in here, obviously, about the Jewish-Palestinian conflict, and so much radiates from that. But there's also, I think, a kind of maybe higher bar that you have where you want to talk about and make people realize that talking about conflict, enmity, deep hatreds, those kinds of things can indeed be positive. It's a constructive attempt to make people constructive in conversation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we're living in such a polarized culture right now. We're really in a positional culture.
Maybe you can even make Democrats and Republicans talk together.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Maybe more of a difficulty than Palestinians and Israelis.
It might be. It might actually be. We might actually have come to that. But I think that the piece, I mean, I've learned about what the piece is as I've continued to do it. I didn't necessarily set out for this. I set out to explore the Israel-Palestine conflict, but what emerged was, as you just pointed out, these more universal themes about engagement, about empathy, about understanding the other, and about what it takes to really engage, not disengage. I mentioned to you earlier, there was a piece in the Times recently about contempt, and the way that contempt has kind of just become an insidious form of expression or relation in our culture. And when you're contemptuous of someone, you pretty much write off their humanity. You're not interested. And I think it's a real problem for democracy. I think that we have to stay connected to our own humanity and to the humanity of others, even if we disagree with them profoundly. It's one thing to be angry with someone. When you're angry with someone, you tell them, I'm angry with you. You hurt my feelings. This is how. But when you're contemptuous of someone, you just write them off, and then the walls go up, and there's no engagement. And this piece is all about engagement. It's all about holding each other accountable for these different points of view.
And you realize that there are those who would say, Boy, if you can believe that Israelis and Palestinians can engage and get beyond, not necessarily even the contempt, but the hatred of generations. I mean, I remember former President Bill Clinton said the most difficult, irresolvable kind of hatred that he had ever faced was between Israelis and Palestinians. He was talking about the whole globe, really. Call yourself an optimist. You'd have to, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I have to, because I guess, you know, I'm in it for the long game. Rebecca Solnit just wrote a beautiful piece that's on the cover of this month's Tikkun magazine, and she's talking about the long game, and that we have to also look at the developments of progress over histories. We can't, you know, but we tend to be really impatient when we say, well, the Israelis and Palestinians just hate. It's the longest hatred. But there's also been progress, and there will be progress, and we have to stay engaged. And there are plenty and quite a number. I mean, there can always be more. So, but there are quite a number of organizations and sectors of the community that are engaging with each other.
That's what you see as progress. I mean, these small groups that get together with Palestinians and Israelis actually talking with one another.
That's right. Look at Combatants for Peace. You know,
these
for
are,
example.
some would say, the choir. I mean, you know, like preaching to the choir. These are people who really have a different point of view than, say, settlers do in Israel, or people who are living under Hamas and living, you know, as loyal to Hamas.
Yeah, the extremists are the extreme, and the majority of humanity is in the middle. They're not on the extreme.
Well, let's see a clip. This is an opening clip I think we're going to see here. Can you set it up for us?
Yeah, I mean, this is the opening of the whole piece, which gives a flavor for the multiple points of view that's the heart of the whole film.
It's complicated.
Complicated! You might say it all started in 1948, which you might call al-Nakba, the catastrophe. You might say it all started in 1948,
Which you might call Milchemet Ha'atzmaut, the War of Independence.
you might go back to World War I, blame the British, say they fucked up 1,000 years of decent relations between Jews and Arabs. You might say it was the 1929 massacre of Jews in Hebron. You might say it was the 1994 massacre of Muslims in Hebron, or the 1982 massacre at Sabra and Shatila, or the 2003 massacre at the Tel Aviv bus station. No, you might say it was 1967. The Six-Day War. That's when the real problems started. No, you might say it was the Yom Kippur War, 1973. That was it. But really, you might say it was 1947. United Nations Resolution 181.
The Arabs should have accepted 181 and they would have a better deal than they're ever gonna get now.
But you might say the UN never should have adopted Resolution 181 because it was a European land grab. Look, you might say it was the invasion of Lebanon. It was the first intifada.
It was the second intifada.
It was the withdrawal from Gaza. It was the war in Gaza.
No, it's the settlements, definitely. Settlements.
No, it's the terror attacks, the bus bombs, the cafes. No, it's the wall and the checkpoints. No, it's the tunnels from Egypt and the missiles in Sderot. No, it's Iran. It's all about Iran. No, it's the politicians. It's all about the politicians. Golda blew it. Perez blew it. Arafat blew it. Barack blew it. Omar blew it. Sharon blew it. Clinton blew it. Bush blew it. Bibi blew it. Abbas blew it. Obama blew it. If they just hadn't killed Rabin.
If we just hadn't killed Rabin. If the ultra-Orthodox just didn't have so much political power.
If the Arab League would just do more. If the media just wasn't so biased. If the right-wing Christians would just stop funding settlements. If AIPAC would just be more critical of Israel. If J Street would just be less critical of Israel. If we just had a real partner on the other side, if the Palestinians would just lay down their arms, if the Israelis would just get out of the West Bank, if the world would just step up and get more involved, if the world would just back off and stay out of it. If.
Well, you certainly set a tone there, Aaron. And what comes to my mind is not so much even the contempt, but just the different narratives and the intensity that you bring to it, kind of histrionically, if I may say so, in a positive sense, but also really exhibiting to what degree and the intensity affects the selection of this and that and how contradictory they are. I mean, in many ways, it almost points out just how difficult it is to engage, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, each one of those lines, I wrote it it's almost a poem, the way that it reads on the page. Each point of view is its own line.
I'll put on my literature professor hat here and tell you, we call it cataloging in poetry. It's like Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grace.
It's a list. It's a list poem.
Some say a litany, but yeah.
Yeah. And so when I was working with my stage director at the time, Michael John Garces, he really wanted to emphasize each point of view was really its own voice, in a sense, and its own insistence of rightness.
Yeah.
And that's where the sort of histrionic kind of explosion kind of, comes.
And the passion.
That's right.
And the almost unrelenting passion of it, the certainty of it, the dogmatism of it. It all comes through.
That's right. And then it just builds and builds and builds and has a kind of cascading and in a sense, absurd effect. When I perform it live, depending on the audience, sometimes by the time we get to Iran, it's all about Iran, people begin to laugh because their own exacerbation with the whole conflict is kind of erupting right there in front of them, and people identify with it.
But you could make the case for so many of those. In fact, people do make the case. It's like taking isolated facts or opinions and then buttressing them and supporting them, some even if they're totally contradictory one to the other.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that, and that felt, in a way, I also wrote this piece specifically to disarm anyone watching the film who was coming in worried that I was going to be against them, right? So in a sense, when we did the live performance, it was really about, looking around the room and saying, okay, look, we're all in here together.
But here's where we get into some, I know you're a great believer in communication and engagement and so forth, having conversations, breaking through humanity to humanity and so forth, but I think I told you that...
all that liberal stuff.
No, I mean, I've said on a few occasions when I talk about Israel and the Palestinians, or when I have people on my program, they're so at odds, but yet I could calibrate it sometime completely even on each side and navigate through it and make it as fair-minded and accurate as I possibly can, nevertheless being a Jewish man. But when I get off the air, I will hear as much of an outcry of me being a Zionist stooge as I will be called a Palestinian puppet. And I come away with this feeling sometimes, I must confess to you, of hopelessness, as I'm sure you did, in bringing all this to bear and bringing it to public attention the way you've done through your art. I mean, you come to the sense sometimes of just so much irresolution and so much talking against each other and not even talking with each other, but totally at each other.
Yeah, and I think grief and hope can occupy the same space. And I don't think they're contradictory. I think they live together. I think that's called life. And
well, you've got a lot of questions here. Let me get to some of them. What character, theater audience member wants to know, what character would you want to have sit down and talk, I've been emphasizing talk, to Trump?
Which character? I guess probably the rabbi character. Yeah, probably the rabbi character.
Okay. How'd you decide which narratives to include or not include?
Well, so I interviewed, I spent 10 years off and on visiting Israel and Palestine and interviewing a lot of different people. And the characters that emerged were the characters that had the most heat, for me personally. And then I wrote into them, and I also created some characters of my own based on people that I've met.
And became those characters. I mean, you have kind of the Anna Devere Smith, obviously. It's a high
she's an
compliment,
influence, of course.
right?
Thank you. And she's
I
an
mean,
influence. Yeah.
You absorb these characters, whether you make them up or whether you've just observed them, don't
Right.
you?
Well, and I think that's really the exercise. We want to look at the meta exercise here. It's to what degree are we willing to go to try to really understand people that are different from us? And of course, that's what actors do. We pretend to be other people to try to understand something that's different, and to put them all in this one sitting together was really this kind of an exercise in exploring the other from their eyes, pretending to be them.
And there's your key to empathy. I mean, you have to empathize to create that character, just like you want to create, almost in a didactic way, a feeling of empathy. Here's someone from the online audience who says, I'm curious what sort of acting and writing study Aaron Davidman did to create such a, he uses the word, engaging monologue.
So I was trained as an actor at Carnegie Mellon University, and then I was an actor in the regional theater world, and I started working with Traveling Jewish Theater here in San Francisco, and became a writer and a director, and then ran that company for 10 years, and that's when the more roots-based work started to emerge for me. Yeah.
I'm curious, another online audience member says, if a performance like this, which seems intentionally overwhelming, shuts people down or opens them up?
That's fascinating. I'm not sure if I don't know what intentionally overwhelming means exactly. It's certainly intentionally intense. My experience has been that it opens people up, that the audience that it sticks around for post-performance or post-screening conversations are in a softer place than they were when they came in.
Chris, have you had some hardcore Zionists or hardcore Palestinian Hamas types see this film?
Well, we just had, I don't know, because they usually don't stick around to tell me, but we just screened the film in Las Vegas at the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival, and Dylan was there, and he said he heard someone storming out with just mumbling and cursing under their breath right past him, and he was a little shaken by it, and I said, Dylan, that's an amazing testament to the craft, because they were totally embedded in the narrative.
You thought he was enraged when he walked out storming?
Dylan thought the woman was just, Dylan was just kind of upset by it, or it startled him. And but I think that kind of response means the work is doing its work.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't set out to upset people. Please don't get me wrong. And I've never experienced that in the play live. I've never had people storm out of the play. People stay, and they stay because I think there's enough in it for them, wherever their perspective is, because of the range that's in the piece, to
You've been
hang
fortunate.
through it.
There are a lot of closed-minded people out there, as I'm sure you realize. You can hear one line in your play and storm out from both sides. But I'm also interested, well, we're going to see another clip in just a moment, and I'll have you set it up for us, but interested in a couple of things that are going on that I know the listening audience will be interested in. One is going to take this on a campus tour, huh?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, campuses, college campuses, we're learning and have been following for the last few years, are just rife with challenges around trying to have this conversation on campus, this conversation being the Israel-Palestine conversation. And the polemic there is really intense. And so we're trying to use the film as a tool for different communities on campus to be able to gather together, engage the piece, hopefully disarm some of the armor that people are coming in with. And then we've got a conversation guide and a whole program that people can, that those communities can engage with.
I think it's a great idea. These kids, as a college professor, I can tell you, they're not necessarily talking or engaging with one another, but to get past a lot of the polemics, as you suggested, and the enmity is going to be very challenging to bring in those who need to be brought in, who simply erupt. I'm also mindful of the fact that lots of things are happening and radiating from this, and you've actually, I mean, as many of the audience listeners, people in the audience and who are watching us now online know, Google is trying to maybe solve all our problems. They even have a longevity project to make us live forever now under Roy Kurzweil and Daniel Kraft to extend life indefinitely.
So we can look forward to having a forum for the rest of eternity?
Maybe that remains to be seen, but. I don't know if we're going to live through this Trump administration, but I'm interested in
We're going to do our best.
what you choose to joke about, huh? Remember Arnold Schwarzenegger, when Trump brought up ratings of Celebrity Apprentice, Arnold Schwarzenegger said, I'll trade places with him and then people will be able to sleep better at night. It's a good line. So, actually, I think what he said was be able to sleep at night. Let me go to this Google event that's happening. I mean, it's unwinding, to use kind of an appropriate word here. You've got some honchos at Google who want to work with you.
Yeah, so I've been working with Google for the last year. They're using the film or the live performance for a training on complexity. Leading through complexity, they call it. Thank you. And yeah, they see the universal themes of the piece, multiple perspectives and multiple perspective taking, and complexity as a really important tool in in training leaders. So they gather 20 or 30 leaders from around the world. They do a 3-day training, and then they use this work of art to help reinforce some of the themes that they're working with. So
that's congratulations on that, and of course on the film. And we're going to see another clip from it. I think, by the way, you might put it in Google's ear that it could help maybe to get some humor in all this. One thing I've learned about writing a book about Jewish humor, that's what we need now, desperately.
Yeah,
people keep telling me, and I think they're right. Tell us about this. Is a Shema clip.
Right, so this is a rabbi character who's giving a drash on the Shema. It's it's his take on universalism, and the Shema, of course, is a central prayer in the daily prayers in the Jewish community.
And he's based on an actual character.
He's a composite also of some different rabbi figures that I've studied over the years.
Okay, as we used to say, roll the film.
This is not my Judaism. I have been a rabbi for 30 years, Aaron. I've been coming to Israel since before the Six-Day War. I have family here. This is not my Judaism. The state of Israel is not my Judaism. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. I say it every day. This, the Shema, is arguably the most important text in all of Judaism. It's so important, not only am I commanded to say it every day, not only do I wrap myself physically in this prayer, a scroll inside my tefillin, but I am commanded to say it when I die. I am commanded to say these words, if possible, with my last breath. What is so very important about this one sentence? I should say it every day of my life, wrap my body in it, and spend my last breath on it. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema, here. Listen. Yisrael, Israel. Listen, people of Israel. Adonai Eloheinu, God, our God. Adonai Echad. God is one. Now, whatever you believe or don't believe, whatever your God is or isn't, Aaron, it's the last two words that are important. Adonai Echad. What does it mean? Perhaps the most misunderstood two words in all of Western civilization. Adonai Echad does not mean there is only one God. Adonai Echad means God is one. What's the difference? Oh, there's a huge difference. God is one, not the number. One, the truth of indivisibility, wholeness. Adonai Echad, these two words are Judaism's greatest gift to the world. Abraham is living in a time of human sacrifice. And here comes the idea that God is not out there in the heavens apart from us. God is all things, including us. God is the interconnectedness of all of life that's on this earth and all that's out there in the stars. It's the Big Bang, the quantum theory, the string theory, the Tao, the Buddha. Love, call it what you want. We're all interconnected. That's the message. That's the Jewish message. We are God. Yes, we are God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel, God, our God. God is one. There is no other. It's time to end human sacrifice. That was the radical message 3,000 years ago.
Mazel tov, another really compelling and in many ways extraordinary scene. You know, I can't help getting the thought, though, when I see that particular scene, of how much, I mean, it's kind of a theological disputation, really. It's well rendered, well captured. But I get the feeling that those kind of divisions are as much among Jews, especially believers, and non-believers. I wrote a book on agnosticism. But there's as much of that kind of unwillingness to sacrifice one's position and talk about the differences as there is maybe among the Jews and the Arabs.
Right. Sure. Well,
But you got the passion right, I think, in that. I mean, when people think they understand the nature of God or the nature of the Shema, there's a joke about the Shema that I didn't include in my book, but, you know, it had to do with all of the arguments about how long you're supposed to stand and how long you're supposed to give your reverence to God and so forth. And the Shema, for many Jews, is the heart of Judaism, but for many Jews, of course, it's not. It's social justice, or it's something beyond prayer and beyond God.
or it's a mystical concept.
Yeah.
Echad, the total, you know, one undivided totality of existence.
Do you come to that yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the only way I can make sense of it. That's the only way I can make sense of what God is, you know, as the ineffable, infinite, whatever.
But you've
this all
also
is.
taken voices in this that you don't necessarily believe in or stand behind or agree with.
Maybe.
You're being demure. I can understand that. That's good. That's an artist's right. That's an artist's.
I mean, there's that great Thich Nhat Hanh poem. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but I am the dragonfly, and I am the frog that eats the dragonfly. You know, yeah. And I think, in a way, in my highest, best moments, I'm all of those characters, which is why I can climb into them. You know, my better self, my worse self, my higher self, and my lower self, which is why, as an actor, I can transform into them, because I tap into something that makes sense for me in every one of those moments. And that's just the truth of being multidimensional human beings.
You know what Flaubert said about Madame Bovary?
What's that?
Madame Bovary, c'est moi.
Yeah.
And Tennessee Williams, when he was asked how did he create such an extraordinary female character as Blanche DuBois, he said, "My dear, I am Blanche DuBois."
That's right.
You are all these characters, you're saying, in some sense, in some fragment.
Yeah, I think so, for better or for worse. Yeah.
When would it might be for worse, and when would it might be for better?
Well, I think that depends on who you are and what your political standing is. You know, I mean, in other words, the more fractured and armored characters, I think, are going to have and humans are going to have a harder time creating community and peace. And I think the softer, more loving characters are going to have an easier time.
But you want all their humanity to shine through, don't you?
Yeah, sure.
This is an ambitious thing to do, especially with characters who are not necessarily all that resplendent in their shining.
Tell me about it.
Well, you've talked about this a little bit, but actually, we've talked about a number of these things that people are raising in the way of questions. But here is one member of the audience who says, "David Bin's work brought home to me that engagement requires acceptance of multiple truths. I'm trying to keep this in mind when I'm thinking about how to bridge the divide in perspectives here in America. Can Aaron comment on multiple truths on the same situation?"
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, this is multiple truths invites us to be more expansive human beings, and we have to embrace uncertainty because we don't know how this is all going to go. And you know, and you know, if we look at history, there, you know, uncertainty evolved into some sort of certainty in the past, and some of those certain things were good, and some of them were terrible. And I think we have to, and in a way, and again, I'm sort of quoting, mentioning Rebecca Solnit's piece that I just read, but she's sort of reminding us that hope lives in uncertainty, actually. You know, and you could say our own fear also lives in uncertainty because we don't know if it's going to, you know, which way it's going to go. But hope lives in uncertainty too, because it might go well. And it can go well if we act and make it go well. And I think that's a really empowering factor. And part of holding multiple truths is that we can't lock down and know so much. You know, I mean, part of the opening sequence, if we go back to the first clip that we showed, is that there's so many different starting points to this conflict that we would be good to ourselves to not know so much, to not be so insistent that we absolutely know. And so in a way, the film is kind of an invitation to not know so much. And I think that also sort of answers this question of multiple truths in this day. If we could just take a step back from being so sure about everything and listen and pay attention, we might make space for more truths to coexist.
Well, I'm thinking about, you know, the old song in Exodus, "This land is mine, God gave this land to me," like the Shema is from God, or is a hallowing of God, or a reverence of God. And God gave us this land, and of course, the Palestinians say, we were on this land before you came here, like the Native Americans say about the United States. And so you've got two narratives completely in conflict, but you also have, and this comes up, I think, in the course of, it certainly is stimulated by your play, the idea that you killed our children and you killed our children, back and forth, you know. And how do people talk when they have those kinds of things that they're holding, that they're not only holding on to, but that they feel makes them, whatever the narrative differences are, makes them right?
Right. Well, again, look, you know, go back to the Combatants for Peace. Look at them. They've both had their, you know, or the bereaved families groups, where you know, Palestinian whose family members have been killed by the IDF, and you know, Israelis whose family members have been killed by Palestinian militants. They come together and they say, and they turn toward the world and they say, we come together and say, enough. We've lost enough. Let's stop. So if they can do that, that's amazing.
And you were talking about positive things before. You were saying, like, colloquies here in the United States between Israelis and Palestinians. How much do you see, you said some good things have happened, but how much do you see in the region itself that has moved forward or that suggests progression, talking to each other? Because the Palestinian kids aren't even allowed to talk to Israeli kids, and Israeli kids, for the most part, are not allowed to talk to Palestinians.
I mean, sadly, it's a diminishing, you know, they're diminishing communities at the moment. But, you know, there are incredible organizations that are supporting progressive and, forward-thinking programs in Israel that are trying to create community across those lines, and they need our support.
And making progress somehow, one hopes.
Sure, because I think progress happens, you know, like this. Progress happens, you know, one person at a time. That's how progress happens. We have to be patient.
Here's somebody who says, do you expect people to come to a new, coherent point of view after seeing the film, or if you expect them to simply be sitting more consciously with paradox?
That's a great question. I mean, I think Dylan and I both would agree that we don't expect anyone to have any specific reaction to the movie. Stay engaged with it is our greatest hope. But I would probably, if I was pressed, go with the latter. That sitting with paradox is the truth of our reality, and if we can sit with that, that will allow us to know how to act and know what our own truth is. And to me, that's the, you know, I mean, I think I'm more appreciative of art, and I hope we've made art that isn't so prescriptive, but that you know, invites us to think about our own humanity in a new way, whatever that means for us. And so if that means holding paradox in a new way, I think that's great.
You do have a didactic purpose here, though. You want people to be more open and humane and engaging with each other. People who have had long-standing differences and terrible enmities, profound enmities.
That's right. I don't want them running from the theater punching each other on the way out. That's for sure.
That can be done with certain filmmakers as well. Let's see another clip, and this we'll call this the somatic psychology clip?
Yeah, so this is based on a somatic psychologist that I know who taught me a lot about trauma. Somatic psychology, of course, is psychology that incorporates the body, and so he told me a lot about the way we transfer trauma across generations, and you'll see it. But so then I created this somatic psychologist, this woman who's Israeli, talking about how trauma affects the community there.
Yeah, see it.
We are at war with biology, Aaron. We are so deep inside a repeating cycle of trauma. It's physiological. We are social primates. We crave contact, intimacy, warmth, love. We are biologically dependent on social connection. We have nerves here around the eyes, the vagal nerves for social cueing. 90% of communication is without words from the time we are born. I am an infant held at mother's breast. I can see only 7 inches. What do I see? Mother's eyes. She gazes at her new baby. I am seen. I am acknowledged. This is where I begin to receive the social cueing that will support my life, that tells me I am safe, I am cared for, I am loved. Now, what happens when mother is living in a war under immense stress? She holds me at her breast, but she turns her eyes. Mother is tense. Father is away at war. Perhaps father has been killed. Perhaps father returned from battle and is rough with mother. Home is filled with stress. Mother is nervous. Mother is afraid. I am a tiny baby. I pick up on these cues. No words have to pass. The cueing happens here. From the first days of my life, the message is clear. Mother is not safe. I am not safe. We see it here in the clinic every day. Grown men and women in the eyes. I am not safe. I experience it myself. Now, look at Israel, 1948. Refugees coming from Europe after the cataclysm of the Holocaust. They do not speak of it. They hold the trauma inside. They never release it. They don't know how. What they know from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, imagine raising a child, holding a child to your breast with Holocaust trauma in your head, in your body. What that child see in your eyes? Horror, fear, mistrust, passed on in the first weeks of the child's life. Then the child grows. Every few years, war, more trauma. Then the child go to the army. Then that child raise their child. Generation to generation, and the trauma is never released. 1948, Palestinians suffer trauma. The expulsion from their lands, the killing in that war. Aaron, I do not compare levels of trauma. Trauma is trauma. You think a baby care if you are Israeli or Palestinian? The message in the eyes is the same. I am not safe.
I'd like to get into content, but first, before we do, I'm looking at a question from the online audience about how difficult, well, the question is phrased this way: were there any characters you found particularly difficult to portray? This?
No, they're all difficult. It's difficult material, but no, there isn't one character that's more difficult than
Tell us about the genesis
another.
of this character. Where come from?
Well, so I interviewed my friend who's a somatic psychologist, and I felt like one of the pieces that I really wanted. This character, I think, is the most objective character in the whole film, because she's talking about how trauma is carried in the body. It's biology. She's talking about biology. We are at war with biology, she says at the beginning. And I think that's fascinating. I think it reduces the conflict down to a cellular level. And in a way...
Maybe even epigenetic. I mean, there's postulating that it goes on to generations.
Yeah, that's right. And it could be Israel-Palestine. It could be, Yugoslavia. It could be Rwanda. It could be, it could be anywhere. It could be in the ghetto here, in the States. So I think how we disrupt that is a really interesting question.
Not only how we construct it, but...
Disrupt.
I mean, disrupt, excuse
yeah.
me, but also how we absorb it and how we live with it, endure it.
Yeah. From a formal point of view, I'd point out this scene was super fun to shoot because this was one of the scenes that we could just be really intimate with and quiet. And we were in the dressing room, and they set up the camera and shot it into the mirror, and I was able to really just kind of mine the subtlety of this and really work with the eyes. And it was a kind
As
of
an actor, I bet you prefer that nuance, huh? Yeah, that subtlety.
For this moment, I did. Yeah. It was sweet to work that way.
Were there moments in the film that were fun or sweet?
Every moment. I mean, it was some of the 10 best
you're dealing with
days
some
of my life.
Tough material here, and volatile material.
The material was super tough, but it was a delight to be able to kind of focus on the performance, for the camera instead of for a live audience. That was a delight. Yeah.
It's a member of the audience who says, in my opinion, making this a one-man show was incredibly powerful. How and why did you come to the conclusion to cast it as such?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was a commission. The play was a commission from Ari Roth out of Washington, D.C., and his invitation was to create a solo piece, so it just started that way. But what emerged as I thought about it later was that, again, it's this exercise of holding all these different parts, all these different perspectives in one person. So while we could cast 17 different actors to come out and do monologues, in a way, the exercise is really all about what happens when one person holds all of this. And that, in a sense, becomes its own metaphor that I think is really powerful and important for right now.
And from the online audience, have you considered creating an embodied, immersive self with your empathetic scenes here in a virtual reality experience for participants?
No, I haven't. That's interesting.
Interesting idea, though.
I don't know enough about virtual reality to know how, what that means exactly technologically. All I can imagine is me really big in some glasses that someone's wearing, and I'm not sure that's what they mean.
I had to put those on once on the air, and believe me, it's cumbersome and weird, but it's where we're headed probably in many ways. Where are you headed next? I mean, you've got this film out now, you've got all these projects, good luck with them, with Google, college campuses, exciting stuff and everything, but where are you going to take your art?
Well, I seem to be really in this space where we're talking about multiple perspectives in a time when we really need it. And so I'm going to be developing a new piece that's going to enter into that area from another, not necessarily a solo piece with 70 different characters at all. I don't know what the form is going to take yet. But I was recently in Poland and in Central Europe doing some research, and what's happening in Europe right now is really
Anything
interesting to me.
ignited, though, that would maybe lead embryonically to another work, not necessarily a monologue, but something?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There will be a new piece. I don't know enough about it yet to say what it is, but there will be a new piece coming.
And now that you've made your entree into the film world, perhaps
there's a new film project that Dylan and I are beginning to talk about and explore as well. Also, not known enough to say what it is exactly, but we love our collaboration. We want to make something, we want to make another piece, yeah.
Tell us a little bit in the time left we have about the response that you've had. This has been shown in Israel too, right?
No,
Not yet?
we
No?
haven't screened the film or done the performance over there. It just hasn't quite happened yet. Partly, we're a small organization of just a couple people, and we've been really busy moving the play all over North America and getting the film made and now distributed. We just haven't really had the bandwidth for it, but I hope to screen the film over there.
It should be screened in Israel.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree, in the audience? Yeah. And if you could get it into Gaza or into the West Bank,
Yeah.
that would be, as we used to say, a machaya. Response that you've had to the film so far. I mean, it's been really quite laudatory, I know, but what kind of effect has it had on you?
Well, on me, what kind of effect has the response had on me?
Yeah. And what have you heard?
Well, I've heard that in some way, first I heard a lot of nervousness. How could the film, before they saw the film, people saw the film, how are you going to capture that amazing thing we experienced in live theater? It's live theater, how, I don't know if this is going to work. And then this sense of like, wow, that really worked. They really made it into cinema, and it's a different kind of experience. Some people said, I don't know, do I like the play better, the film better? I'm not sure. Some people think that the film, in a way, because there's so much material, so much dense material, that the film allows a little bit of distance, and it's a little more almost digestible than the live performance was. That's one thing we've heard that I think is kind of interesting. I should say on that note that if people want to engage with the text itself, it is published and it's on Amazon. And I think actually for the people that are here today, we have some scripts in the lobby. And what I've heard from folks who see the work and then read the text is that there's more there's more.
They get a lot more out of it.
They get more out of it. In fact, I've had a few people say, I've read part of your script at the Passover table, or my father was ill in the hospital and we looked at the Shema together and we bonded over it, and some of these different kind of things, the way that they've taken the text, I've been really touched by.
I'm just curious because, I have my whole adult life has been one of scholarship in many ways. What kind of research did you do for this play? What kind of background and text did you find yourself having to go to?
I mean, it's so...
For this film as well as the play?
Yeah, I mean, it was really about research for the piece, which started around 2000 when I was working on a different piece with Traveling Jewish Theater, and I went back, and that's when I really started digging into research, the Benny Morris history books, and all kinds of Palestinian authors, Edward Said, and Israeli authors. It's films, texts, religious texts. Some that I just studied on my own. It's really almost too much to sort of cite off a bibliography, but it was certainly 15, 20 years of sort of my own investigating and absorbing these different layers of what those narratives are. Because you talk about competing narratives, that was in a way my first instinct to investigate this topic is this whole idea of storytelling. The Jewish people are a people of a story. We gather around a story every week, and we measure ourselves, or we don't. Right? But one way or another, we measure ourselves against that story, that narrative. That's the Old Testament. And so to me, this whole idea of story is central to who we are as a people. And so then to look at the Israel-Palestine story and how there are different narratives that compete with each other was really, that was my way in. And as a storyteller now, and both in theater and film, I find, and in this day and age in particular, the narrative is the power right now. Who controls the narrative, has the power. And so to me, storytelling is now suddenly this incredibly, or maybe not suddenly, maybe it's always been, suddenly for me, a very powerful tool.
Even if you use alternate facts, right?
So to speak. That's right. Well, it is. It's powerful in negative ways and in positive ways. And so, it's important to harness those narratives in
They
positive
supported
ways.
essentially where you were going, what you used, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
by and large, yes.
I got to ask you a question just to conclude here, and it's a question that's haunted me for many years, and I'm just curious to have your take because you've been so immersed in this. Recently, I interviewed on the air someone named Bernard Henry Levy, whom you may know, and some
I know who
people
he
in the
is,
audience
yeah.
may know. Just wrote a book called Jewish Genius, and he is really one of the foremost public intellectuals in Europe, probably the most foremost intellectual in France, and unabidingly pro-Israel. And he makes the argument, as many Jews do, that if you are critical of Israel, and I don't know if he says this about Jews also, but he certainly says it about non-Jews, you're anti-Semitic. That's an argument that I have always not accepted because I know people who are very critical of Israel, and I don't believe they're anti-Semitic in their personal relations and so forth, with me, with others. And yet, he makes the argument based on something that has a kind of logic to it I'd like to hear what you have to say. He says, why are so many of these young people who are out there protesting against Israel not protesting against, I'll use a word that the Trump administration and Bannon have been using, the carnage that we see so devastating in Syria, in the Congo, that we saw in Cambodia. I mean, you can just go through, obviously, Bosnia and so forth. Yeah. Why is it focused on Israel? What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I had the same question for a long time. And Peter Beinart, I asked him this question. And he said, look, and he gets this question a lot too, and he's smarter than me and has done more research than me, so I'm going to quote him. But he says that it's not anti-Semitism per se, just because Israel is a focal point of the world in a way that some of these other places aren't, and has been for a long time. And some people, for whatever reason, are drawn to that focal point. And that's enough for him. And I think it's enough for me. I mean, I think the United States, in America, we spend more money in Israel than we spend our tax dollars. We spend more money in Israel than we spend anywhere in these other conflicts. So I think that's another interesting sort of justification for people to want to be critical.
I've read Beinart for years, but I hadn't come across it. So thank you.
But I don't want to just leave that hanging because I think that. Because I think that love and criticism can go together, and they do in family, right? They do.
Although reminded what Sal Bello said, that Israel is sort of the Switzerland place of vacation morally.
And that for many that's the case, and for many of us that's not the case. And we want to hold our motherland, fatherland to a higher standard. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think we can love our way towards an Israel that we all feel represents who we are, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Let me conclude by thanking you in the audience for being here, both in the online audience, the audience here in the New Mission Theater, and congratulate you once again, Aaron, on this extraordinary work that you've brought to life. And also, let me say mazel tov, because recently Aaron got married to a daughter of an old friend of mine. As we like to say back in the old days, we should only meet at Simchas. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.